The truth is, like everybody else in this world, I was born into a world where we all run from our fears. We all question ourselves on a day to day basis. We all overthink, and we do all of these things when life passes us by. Over the last year, I've really been able to go deep within myself and recognize what's working and what's not working in my life. And it's until today that I have been able to break out of the matrix and to learn how to choose myself, love myself, and trust myself. So, if any of that resonates with you, I just want to give a brief disclaimer that this video series will touch on topics of childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, death, spirituality, and other sensitive topics. So, with that being said, this is the story of how I escaped my old life. So, let me just give you a brief introduction of who I am, what my childhood was like, and who I was prior to the beginning of the story. So, my name is Jacob Green. Hi. I was born in Los Angeles, California. And growing up, I was super active, super motivated, and I always had a ton of friends. I was playing soccer, I was playing baseball, I was captain of the drill team, and all of that was fun and all, but my life really took a turn in 2008 when my parents both got a divorce. And that's really when my world turned upside down. From that point forward, my mom and my sister would constantly fight. There was even a point where my sister ran away, and I was so afraid, not knowing if she'd even come back or not. Not to mention, it was really hard to acclimate as a young kid, suddenly going from having all the time in the world with my family to having 50-50 time with each parent. It was very hard to adjust to. And I know a lot of kids out there blame themselves for when their parents go through divorce, but for me, I didn't necessarily feel responsible for them splitting. I think I just felt more responsible over taking care of them as I saw the pain that they were both going through. Even though life wasn't great, even though my mother and my sister were constantly fighting, whether this be verbally, whether this be physically, I was there to watch all of it. Even at birthday dinners, they would fight publicly, and it made me and my family so uncomfortable. Throughout this divorce and throughout my life moving forward, I would take on this role of a caregiver, of the therapist sibling, the therapist friend, the therapist child, be the peacekeeper, all while I was so sensitive to the energy around me. I felt responsible to not only stay strong, but to nurture those that I saw were going through pain. And in doing that, I kind of conditioned myself to never speak up about anything that I was feeling, kind of conditioned myself to bottle everything inside that I was feeling, because the last thing that I wanted to do was to burden anyone else with my pain, because I already saw how big other people's problems were. I felt any time that I did speak up about how I felt, it was really just brushed under the rug because my problems were not nearly as important or big as the problems my mom was facing, or the problems my dad was facing, or my sister, or anyone older than me. There was a silver lining, however, in my childhood. I think we all experience pain in childhood, but for me, I was able to put my pain and pleasures into my passions. And at the time, my childhood dream was to be on Disney Channel. Hey. So I started acting and making Vine edits out of my bedroom. And it was really, really fun. I acted for a few years. I was in a few things. And I can say that had I continued, I probably would be somewhere. But I do believe everything happens for a reason. So I was acting for a few years. I was booking a few things. and I was making Vine edits, and I was finding something to pour myself into creatively. Let's fast forward to 2015 when this story really starts. So, fast forward to 2015, it is towards the end of 7th grade in middle school, and I meet a friend by the name of Red. Red and I met through a mutual friend through playing a game. It was called Fun Run. I don't know if you remember that, but instantly me and Red connected. Me and Red clicked. And from that day forward, me and Red would continue to hang out with or without our mutual friend. And slowly, we would really build this long-lasting friendship that would soon become codependent and constricting in a lot of ways. Okay.
I'm 14K. I'm 14K. Don't get up like mine. You say got touch so bad, make you never wanna leave. So don't. Gotta dress you up some skin tight. Yeah. I think I mean I just said.
Okay. Oh my god, did I? Okay. Sorry. Let's just take a picture of myself.
Please download on your computer. This is like a step-by-step process.
Is there just a website you can go on? No. Oh, damn.
I mean, it's really easy. You just go on Skype.com in the Chrome box, and then you go
I'm sure she knows how to download. Oh yeah, I know how to download.
She just asked.
When did she ask? I was just
Now.
wondering if you could.
Red was the very first friend that I had that introduced me to video games online at the time. Now, I used to play games on the console like a lot of other kids growing up, but I never really dove into PC gaming or playing games online. And Red was the first person to introduce me to that. A few months after really playing some video games with Red, I went to my dad and I told him, I'm no longer interested in acting. Dad, I want to quit acting. And he was like, what? Are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure. He was like, why? You're so close to a breakthrough. We've put in so much work just to get here. Why do you not want to do it? At first, I was telling him that reading the scripts just became too tiresome and tedious for me. But really, I think Red was showing me a different side of life that I kind of wanted to explore a little more, which was living a normal life. My dad was very vocal about expressing his disapproval over this decision, but ultimately he had no control over if I was going to continue acting or not. But despite him being super upset, not just because of how hard I worked, but because of how hard he worked to try and make my dreams come true, we called it quits, and I stopped acting. Once I stopped acting, I had a lot more time just to relax, to hang out, to go home every day after school and play some video games, and that's exactly what I did with Red. Once I had more time to just game, I started to make online friends of my own, and this became a pivotal point in my life because my life went from being very out there and active and social to being more confined and online and codependent on just one singular friend. As the years progressed, me and Red would continue to become codependent on one another. In 2016, Red and I entered high school, and immediately upon entering high school, Red made it very clear that she wanted to have her own friends that she sat with during lunch, and she wanted me to sit at a different table during lunch. I think part of this was because she just wanted to have people outside of me to be friends with, which I completely understand. I wanted the same. But I think she was a lot more meticulous and forceful about making sure that that happened versus just letting it happen the way it's supposed to, naturally. And so that was fine. I had my own friends at lunch. Red had her own friends at lunch. And every day throughout high school, for the most part, I would go over to Red's house every single day. Red's mom would make us food, me and Red up after school, and I'd go over to her house and we would just play games and we'd just hang out and everything would be really, really fun. I don't know if I was necessarily recognizing this at the time, but when I started to become friends with Red, it started to change as a person. I think because I became so attached to one singular person, I started to mirror the person that I was being friends with. So when I was friends with Red, her mom would make us both food, and Red would take a certain amount of food. And I felt there's two things. One, I felt really weird eating more than what Red was going to eat, knowing that her mom made the food for her. I didn't feel right eating from the palm of a mother who was feeding her child and her friend more than the child was even eating. Like, I just felt weird eating more than the child when her mother was the one making the food. So I consciously chose to eat less, but I also felt weird eating more and having more on my plate than what Red had. And because of that, I would only take however much Red would take. And when Red was done eating, I was done eating. Now, no one told me to do this. No one forced me to do this. This was just something that happened on its own. And without really knowing or coming to terms with it, I was starving myself. I was developing an eating disorder. Throughout 2017 and 2018, despite me growing a strong friendship with Red, my life was still chaotic and all over the place. My mother and my sister were still not the healthiest in terms of their relationship, and they were still always not just getting along. And I always felt that, and it always made me feel bad. Minutes.
Oh, decide what you want, honey. The bread is amazing.
So I'm not understanding, like, we don't just order normally?
No. Grandma and take phone because I put my phone at grandma's.
Yeah.
Because I've been all over the place. Hey,
So did you hear what happened to Mom's computer? Oh, it was funny though.
It's not funny. I was trying to it's not funny. I want to talk about it later. It's not
Never mind then. It's not that big a deal. You should be laughing about it.
Laughing about it, and it was
Your computer's now fixed though, so you should be laughing about it. But you're going to, so.
TGIF.
Who says that?
Now, how are we going to order? We should decide.
I don't know how we order. Nobody's explaining it. I thought we all just order like normal. As the years went on, Red and I would continue to just build a friendship. We would do everything together. I'd go over her house every single day after school. We would take every single of the same class together throughout all of high school. We would go on trips to Disneyland. We'd go on trips to VidCon. We'd go to concerts. We would do everything together. Then comes 2019. So, May of 2019 is our high school prom. To say it in the nicest way possible was so fucked. Was so fucked up. It was all about Red. I wanted to go with Red, but Red felt obligated for whatever reason to go with her other friends despite them making homophobic comments towards me. But besides the fact, me and Red ended up dressing and matching up, and we went together, but we also went with her friends. Completely okay. It was still a fun time. The prom itself was fun. It was fine. But then all of us, me, her, and her friends, ended up booking an Airbnb in Bel Air for the weekend following prom. When we get to the Airbnb, me and Red make our way up to our room that we're going to be staying in, and one of Red's friends, who she has a crush on, is in our bed upon our arrival with another girl. And Red completely loses it. She starts to get upset and frazzled, and rather than just handle the situation calmly, she goes all the way back downstairs and she starts to cope with alcohol. Red has, I think, 2 rum and cokes and maybe a wine cooler. And that's all it took for her to get shit-faced. Now, I'm not saying that Red is a bad person, by the way. I'm not saying that it's Red's fault that she got emotional. I'm not saying it's Red's fault that she got drunk easily. It's not about that at all. But my point being is, instead of that night being about all of us just reflecting on our prom, reflecting on our years throughout high school, and just having a good time, it suddenly became, let's babysit Red because she's shit-faced drunk in the bathroom throwing up. And because of who I am, and because of all of my previous life experiences throughout childhood, I immediately took on, again, this caretaker role. And knowing that Red was not feeling well, I tried every so often to go into the bathroom to check up on her. Her friends were kind of gatekeeping her and locking her away in the bathroom without letting me see her, which was a little weird. And we were there for a few days. And towards the end of the trip, Red got into a fight with one of the guardians that was there, because you have to have a guardian, like someone that's 21 or older, to book an Airbnb. So there was one of Red's coworkers that was staying with us, and she ended up literally getting into a physical fight with him. It wasn't super serious. They were just playing around, but it ended up getting serious when he hurt her, and she ended up breaking a nail because he threw her on the ground. And then Red took his glasses and smashed them. And it just got really dramatic, and I'm not blaming Red for having emotions and handling things the way she did. I just really want to paint the picture that there was never a moment where I could have time to just enjoy. I could never have time to be at peace. I could never have time for it to be about me. It was always about Red, and everything was always centered around Red. And the prom trip, it was actually fun because it was the first time I actually was at an Airbnb. But to say the least, it was really dramatic. And then just a few months later, in 2019, Red and I start college. Soon after, you guys all know what happens. 2020, there's a pandemic lockdown. And I think that while it was difficult for all of us, it only conditioned me further to live a life that was chronically online. At this point, I was happy that we were online because I was already in my comfort zone, but there was never really any room for me to break free of not just my codependency with Red, but of the habits that I formed with gaming and being online. And during lockdown, during 2020, I actually met a friend named Triss online. But we'll get back to Triss later. So in the middle of the pandemic in 2022, my grandma passed away, which was really, really difficult for our family. But it was really painful for me because I did not have the grace to be able to grieve my grandma the same way other people did. As my grandma was in hospice and was passing away, my sister and my mom would continue to fight, and I don't want to put the blame on anybody, but my sister would say the most cruel things to my mother, who's losing her mother, who's losing her best friend, and saying things like, I wish you were dying instead of grandma. You deserve this, not her. And just saying things that would continue to hurt my mother, which in turn would hurt me. Not just because I have love for my mother and my sister and this family, but because I grew conditioned to internalize everybody else's pain, and I felt really responsible for taking care of other people and their emotions and trying my hardest to mend relationships that I wasn't even in control of. So I really didn't have time to grieve my grandma because I was too busy picking up the pieces of my mother that my sister played a role in. I think had my mother had the support of my sister, it would have been a little bit easier of a load for me in terms of nurturing my mom through this process. But I also just didn't really have time to nurture myself. I think I was too busy taking care of my mother and her emotions and micromanaging a million things in my head. In January of 2023, I began modeling. This happened after having a conversation at my birthday dinner with my aunt, and she was saying, you're good looking, Jake. Like, why don't you just cash the check? Like, why don't you just try it out? And I was like, you know what? I've thought about it, and you're right. So that is when I began my modeling journey. And at the same time, I met a friend online named Adam who ended up living in Los Angeles. We'll get back to Adam and Tris later. But for now, here is where the story really begins in May of 2023. May of 2023 is when Red and I are graduating college. But before then, a few weeks before then, Red has a friend online named Misty. And she met Misty online and had never met Misty before, but realized that Misty also lived in LA. And Misty had a bunch of friends flying in from different parts of the world to come for her birthday party. And Red at the time was expressing to me, she's nervous about this party. She doesn't know anybody, and this is her first time meeting Misty. So I offered, I was like, oh, well, I can go with you if you're too nervous, if you want to have someone by your side that you can always fall back on. And she was like, oh, you know what? Sure. Okay. That sounds good. And so we go to this party and we meet Misty. We meet all of her friends. We meet Misty's friends, X, Y, L, and a handful of other people. They don't really matter in the story, but for reference, just remember X, Y, and L. All of them were at this party. We met them for the first time, except for L. L was friends with Red for years before she even knew me. But remember X and Y and L for later. And Misty's friends, X, Y, L, and the handful of other people, they had this online friend group, right? And this friend group was staying in LA for a few days after the party because they were traveling down for Misty's party. And because Red knew that, Red wanted to capitalize on that. So throughout all of our finals week, Red was kind of skipping to go and hang out with Misty and her friends to get to know them better, which is completely okay. The party ends up going well. Me and Red graduate college, and very shortly after graduating and her having that time with her friends, me and Red have a conversation. Red comes to me about having a conversation about needing separation. Along the lines, Red is pretty much telling me that she thinks we both need separation to have a healthy relationship, not just with each other, but, it's really just been me and you this whole time. And, I would like to have friends outside of you, and I would like for you to have friends outside of me, just to have a healthy balance. And I completely agreed with Red. We both needed that. I've never been codependent on someone before, but after growing codependent on Red throughout the years, I realized that I yearned for friends as well. And Misty and her friends also seemed like an opportunity for me to not necessarily make friends, but to just be around other people, to just hang out with other people, and to get out of my box. Because remember, I was confined all these years playing video games. Yes, it was a decision that I made. However, it was very refreshing to be invited to a party. It was refreshing to hang out with other people. It was just refreshing, period, especially coming out of a pandemic. So Red pretty much goes, I think it's best for both of us to have a little bit of distance and to be able to have our own friend groups, but also be able to hang out with each other and to tell each other about, all of the things that we go through with our friends. And yeah, I completely agree with Red. However, Red's approach to having separation between us was very, very meticulous. Whereas for me, I thought that me and Red were going to naturally have separation in our relationship. Her perspective, she thought that the way to have separation was to cherry pick every last thing that I went to when it came to her and her friends, when it came to Misty, when it came to anything. Red's way of having separation was to tell me, this is what we're doing, this is what I need you to not be here for this. It would just be weird. And I really wanted to respect Red So I really did just go along with everything that she was wishing for and asking, because remember, Red was still my only friend, and I love Red, and I want to respect Red, and I want to give her, the independence to be able to have her own friends. I'm not saying that it wasn't something that hurt me, because I was really codependent on her for a while, and I think had it been anybody else, I probably wouldn't have been codependent the same way. But, life happens the way it does. I'm not blaming her for codependency. I'm not blaming her for having me quit acting and for living my life online. I made those decisions because it was fun for me, and I don't have any regrets. However, in my perspective, I thought Red and I were going to have separation naturally. We just finished school. We took every single class together throughout all of high school and all of college. We took every single class together and were attached at the hip. So knowing that school was finally over and we were going to have our own jobs, I figured that we were just going to meet people in our day-to-day lives and have separation naturally, because we literally just weren't going to be around each other as much physically. So I thought that this separation thing, while we both wanted it, I thought that it was going to just happen on its own. But Red was a little more forceful in her approach. So, towards the end of May, Elle, who we previously met at Misty's party, was having her own birthday party. She was having a birthday trip that was going to be in Joshua Tree, Yucca, that whole area. And me, Red, Misty, Elle, and a handful of Elle's friends had dinner in LA the night before. And, Red wasn't really sure if she was going to be invited to Elle's birthday trip or not. But we went to this dinner with her and her friends and Misty. And Elle ends up inviting both me and Red. Not just Red, but Elle ends up inviting me and Red together. And I immediately knew that that was something that was not flying with Red, because Red and I just had a conversation about having separation. She was already very apprehensive about having me at that dinner. Red was not happy about this, but I mean, she's not in much control of it. You know what I mean? When it comes to someone inviting me directly, it was kind of hard for her to say something in the moment in front of all these people. So we end up going. The trip ends up being good. However, there are a few things that happened on that trip that was a little uncalled for. Because I was really codependent on Red, I saw this as an opportunity for me to just try and get to know everybody and be kind and see if I could get along with other people. And it went over really well. I ended up really connecting with all of them, whereas Red didn't really have much chemistry with any of Elle's friends. And one of the last nights in that trip, Elle had a dinner at a restaurant booked, and we all took separate cars to go there. So I was in Red's car, Red was driving, X was in her passenger seat, and it was just me alone in the back seat. And for the majority of the car ride, X was just asking me questions about, my music taste and getting to know me, since we really didn't speak much at all. And later that evening, Red seemed very closed off into herself, and she seemed in a really bad mood. Her phone fell in the pool, which I think definitely contributes to her being a bad mood. But I sensed, and I just knew that it had something to do with me and the fact that I was getting along with her friends and the fact that I was even there. And as we leave this trip, Red says to me, she was like, it just made me really upset that X was only talking to you the whole time and not trying to talk to me. And I'm, spending 40 minutes driving both of you and no one's trying to talk to me, which I completely understand. You don't want to feel like you're just being used for your gas and then whatever. But also, I don't feel like it was necessarily fair to put guilt or blame on me for having someone trying to speak to me when we never spoke prior anyways. So I just don't feel like it was as big of a deal as she made it to be, but I think this really had to do with Red and whatever insecurities and problems Red was going through at the time, and I hold sympathy and compassion for Red. However, I was still getting the short end of the stick. She was just over it towards the last night. She was like, like, I don't really get along with anybody here, and they all seem to like you, and you seem to like have more in chemistry in common with them than I do, so it's whatever. Like, this trip has been whatever for me. And remember, knowing who I am, I internalized that. I felt guilty. I felt the need to take blame. And I also felt responsible for doing whatever I could to get Red to feeling all right and to actually enjoy this trip for what it was. In June of 2023, Red and I go to the Portals concert for Melanie Martinez. The concert was good. Yes, during that concert, I was always in my head kind of looking over to see if Red was having a good time. I know that that wasn't my responsibility, but I need you to understand, for the longest time in my life, I was the biggest people pleaser. I was very codependent. I felt like I was supposed to take on this therapist caregiver role, and I just felt very responsible for making sure that everybody's bags were taken care of before taking care of my own. So the Portals concert was good, although I was very cognizant of Red and where she was at mentally. At the end of that concert, as we're driving home, Red gets a call from Misty. Misty is saying, hey, like, do you want to go to this rooftop party that I have tomorrow? There's a rooftop party tomorrow in LA. Do you want to come? And Red is like, oh, no, I can't because I'm getting my tongue pierced the next day. And she was like, oh, okay, well, get better soon. It's okay. And then once that call ends, I go to check my phone, and I already noticed that I have a missed call from Misty. And I turn to Red and I say, oh, I have a missed call from Misty. And then I get a text from Misty, and it's her asking me if I want to go to this rooftop party tomorrow. And immediately, before I make that decision for myself, Red goes, just tell her you're busy. She was like, well, you're coming with me tomorrow to get my tongue pierced, but I also think it would be weird, if you went without me. It would be weird if you went and I wasn't there. It's funny that Red says it'd be weird if I went if she wasn't there. Yes, because they're her friends, but at the same time, the one thing that you were so forceful about was that you wanted to have distance. You wanted to have separation. You didn't want everyone to just see us as Jacob and Red, like everyone always saw us as. You wanted to be your own individual person, and you wanted me to be my own individual person. And the minute I get invited to something, if you can't go, I don't see what the big deal would have been if I could have went. And also make a name for myself, be my own person, and not always be around your friends when you're there. Or else they're going to just see us as Jacob and Red, the one thing that you were so worried about. But whatever. I wanted to respect Red. I wanted to still be there for Red when she was going to be recovering from her tongue piercing, so I ended up just not saying anything. I didn't call back Misty. I didn't text her back. I just kind of left it on Red. I left it whatever. It's funny that Red always cherry-picked what things I would go to when it came to her and her friends. But when it came to me and my friends, I never cherry-picked what Red could go to. I always left the door open. Anytime me and Adam were hanging out, doing photo shoots, doing whatever, Red was always welcome. There was never a time where I said, no, you can't come. I think it'd be weird if you were there. I want to have distance. When Red went through all of her online relationships and her breakups, I was always there to tell her, I understand if you're feeling alone. Like, I'm here, like, with my friends, and you can always hang out with me and my online friends if you want. Like, I always left the door open. But that same energy was never reciprocated my way. And rather than getting my ass up and walking out the door, I still stayed complacent and putting Red first before I put myself first. Whereas Red always put herself first before she put me first, which isn't a problem. I think the lesson that really had to be learned was that I was not putting myself first, and I didn't know how to. A few days after that concert, my mom and I go on this cross-country road trip from LA all the way to Florida. And the first place we're going to is Arizona. And guess who lives in Arizona? X, Y, and my online friend Tris that I met in the pandemic. I go with the intention of hanging out with Tris. However, X and Y find out through a little back and forth on Discord that I'll be in Arizona. And so they reach out and they're like, hey, we heard you're going to be in Arizona for a few days. Would you want to hang out, grab lunch, do whatever? And initially I was like, oh my God, that's going to be fun. Like, sure, I'll stop through. I'll hang out with them for a minute. But Red, before I could make that decision for myself, Red immediately was like, just tell them you're busy. And I was like, why? I mean, I'm not busy. I'm going to be in Arizona. And she was like, again, like, I think it would be really weird if you hung out with them if I wasn't there, because those are my friends. This is when I finally, like, broke a little. And I was like, Red, it's a little controlling and a little bit extreme for you to say I shouldn't go and hang out with these people. I'm all the way in Arizona. It's not as deep as you think. And she was like, look, I have respect for you. Anytime you hang out with your friends, I'm not trying to get so caught up in the middle of it. But if I'm asking for you to not hang out with my friends, if it makes me uncomfortable, you should just say okay. And also, you know, it makes me really upset that, like, these people are already trying to, like, get to know you better when I've just been trying my hardest to get to know them. And, you know, I've tried so hard to, like, create distance between us, but it's like my friends are already wanting to be friends with you. And, like, at the end of the day, you're going to do what you want, but it's going to come down to, like, one of our happinesses. That was her way of guilting me. That was her either saying, you're going to make me upset by hanging out with them, or you're going to be upset for doing what makes me happy and not hanging out with them, which was the truth. But I ended up choosing her happiness because, again, I wanted to respect Red. And I wanted to respect that these were people she was trying to get to know. These are her friends. She wants this more than I do. And she's making it a really big deal. This whole thing is a bigger deal than I ever wanted it to be. So for peace, I'm just going to give her what she wants. I'm not going to hang out with these people. I ended up telling X and Y that I was busy, and I'll let them know if I could hang out on my way back, which I never did, which was all because of Red. And here is a turn in the story. Let's focus on Tris. Tris was a friend of mine that I met during the pandemic. It was a very slow burn connection. We actually didn't quite like each other at first, but we started to bond the more we started to play games together. And we started to bond when we opened up a lot about our sexuality. Now, me and Red were never really open when it came to sexuality just because we grew up together really young, so it almost felt really weird. Like, Red felt like a sister to me, whereas Tris was kind of like the best friend I never had, like the reckless, rebellious friend. And Tris and I really bonded over the games that we played. It was us always talking about boys, us always talking our mouths off when it came to, you know, explicit conversations. And we just got along well. But there's a few things that I remember. I'll start off by saying that the trip in Arizona was some of the most fun that I ever had because I never really stepped out of my comfort zone like that. You know, we were trespassing parks. We were, you know, it was like a trip. It was weird. I've never done anything like what I did when I was in Arizona. But there was a few things that I noticed that I kept to myself, but my intuition just, it nudged me. So the very first thing was I had intended to hang out with Tris, but Tris had her friend Cole, who, by the way, is 10 years older than her. Not that that's a problem, but he obviously had a crush on her, and she's just been using him for his resources, like his gas, and the fact that he's a people pleaser too, which is, you know, how she was using me as well. But, you know, the minute I met them, we were walking towards Cole's car because they came to pick me up from an Airbnb that my mom and I were staying at. And rather than walking next to me, you know, this best friend that she has that she's never met before, she's not walking like arm in arm with me. It's like me and her friend Cole are walking side by side, and she's walking like up ahead in the middle and like walking like whatever. And I always saw that as weird. I just saw it as weird. Like something ticked off in my head when she did that. But I didn't say anything. I just kind of like It was like an internal smile. It was like a. But when we were in the car, I remember looking to Triss because we were in the back seat together. And I was like looking at her eyes. And I was like, are your eyes actually blue? And she looks to me and she's like, bitch, come on. You know they're not real. I told you that. I told you that before. You must have forgotten. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, and I knew in my heart, in my gut, my intuition was telling me, I was like, she never told me that. She actually dead ass had me believe that her eyes were blue. Like, she didn't tell me that, yet she's telling me that she told me, and I just don't. But I didn't say anything because I was just going to take her word for it. But I knew that was not the truth. Besides that, the Arizona trip went fairly well. Towards the end of the Arizona trip, it became weird. Online, Triss expressed having this stalker that lived in her apartment complex who was like way older of a gentleman. And me and Triss wanted to have a little bit of fun without Cole present. And so Triss's smart idea was to completely leave her friend Cole behind, not knowing where we went, and going up to the stalker's house and chilling inside his house where he would continue to try and give us booze from his Stanley cup. It wasn't the safest. It was fun. It was a trip. It was definitely something new, which is why it was exciting, but it definitely was not the safest predicament that we could have been in. And like I mentioned, me and Triss had a lot of history. Our conversations were always like very open, and we always wanted to have a threesome together. But towards the tail end of the Arizona part of the road trip, I got really sick. And it was my last day because the following morning, me and my mom were leaving. And I was sleeping, but Triss still managed to find a way to make sure that she got the threesome in for us to have while I was sick. And yes, I participated. No one forced me to do that. But I did think it was a little inconsiderate of Triss at the time to still have a guy come over while I wasn't feeling well. If it was me and I knew my friend wasn't feeling well, even if I wanted to do something and check it off the bucket list, I would have just let my friend rest. I would have known that they weren't feeling well and that there would have been another time. But again, I'm not holding that against her. The Arizona trip was still fun. My mom and I ended up going to Texas. We ended up going to New Orleans. And at New Orleans, I actually got birthday presents for Red, for Triss, and for a few other online friends of mine. And then it was Florida, home sweet home.